The sun had just dipped below the rooftops, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple, when a man in a faded blue jacket and a well-worn baseball cap stepped into the fast food restaurant on the corner of 12th and Maple. The place buzzed with the usual evening rush, kids laughing over milkshakes, tired workers grabbing a quick bite before heading home, a couple arguing softly over who forgot to pick up diapers. The air smelled like fried potatoes and cleaning solution, a familiar mix that most people barely noticed anymore. But to him, it was different. Every sound, every glance, every interaction felt magnified, like he was seeing the world through a lens he hadn't used in years. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not like this. Not in old jeans and scuffed sneakers, not with his hands shoved deep in his pockets, not pretending to scroll through his phone while he waited in line. He was the kind of person who usually walked into rooms where people stood up straighter, spoke more carefully, and made sure their ties were perfectly knotted. But tonight he was just another customer, and that was exactly the point. For months, something had been gnawing at him. On paper, everything looked fine. Profits were up. Franchise growth was steady. Customer satisfaction scores hovered just above the industry average. But the numbers didn't tell the whole story. He'd started noticing little things. Emails from regional managers that sounded more stressed than usual. Turnover reports showing certain stores losing staff faster than they could hire them. Anonymous comments on internal surveys that read like quiet cries for help. "We're stretched too thin," one said. "Feels like no one upstairs remembers what it's like down here," read another. He'd asked his team about it. They'd assured him it was isolated. Normal growing pains. Nothing to worry about. But he couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something important. So he made a decision. He'd go see for himself. No advance notice, no entourage, no fancy title. Just him, a disguise, and an open mind. The line moved slowly. The register beeped with each order. A teenager behind the counter tried to keep up, her voice polite but tired as she repeated the specials for the 100th time that shift. Her name tag was slightly crooked and there was a small coffee stain on her sleeve. She looked like she'd been on her feet for hours and probably had. When it was his turn, he ordered the basic combo: cheeseburger, medium fries, large soda, nothing fancy. He paid with cash, took his receipt, and stepped to the side to wait. As he stood near the pickup counter watching the kitchen staff scramble to fill orders, he overheard a conversation between two employees. One was restocking napkins while the other wiped down the drink station. "I swear, if the boss ever walked in here," the first one said, voice low but clear, "I'd tell him we're all drowning and he wouldn't care." The words hit him like a punch to the chest. He didn't move, didn't flinch. But inside, something shifted. It wasn't anger he felt, it was shame. Because he was the boss. And he hadn't cared enough to look closer. He'd trusted the reports, the graphs, the polished summaries. He hadn't considered the human beings behind the numbers. The ones showing up day after day. Dealing with broken fryers, rude customers, and schedules that changed without warning. He glanced at the speaker. She was young, maybe early 20s, with dark circles under her eyes and a quiet strength in the way she held herself. She wasn't complaining to be dramatic. She was stating a fact as plainly as someone might say, "It's raining outside." And that made it worse. His food arrived in a paper bag, warm to the touch. He took it without a word and found a booth near the back, far from the main traffic. He didn't eat right away. Instead, he watched. He saw how the manager, a man in his 30s with a tight jaw and a walkie-talkie clipped to his belt, kept glancing at the clock, like he was counting down the minutes until closing. He saw how the drive-through line backed up because the headset kept cutting out. He saw how the ice cream machine had a handwritten sign taped to it. "Out of order, sorry." None of this was in the corporate dashboards. He finally unwrapped his burger. It was fine, not great, not terrible. The fries were a little soggy, probably because they'd been sitting under the heat lamp too long. But it wasn't about the food. It was about the people making it. The ones who were expected to deliver a 5-star experience with 3-star resources and 1-star support. He thought back to when he'd started the company. It had been a single storefront, just him and one other person cooking burgers late into the night, cleaning the floors themselves, remembering every regular's name. Back then, he knew exactly what it felt like to be on the front lines. He knew the ache in your feet after a 12-hour shift, the frustration when the cooler broke on a hot Saturday, the pride when a customer said, "This is the best meal I've had all week." Somewhere along the way, he'd drifted. Meetings replaced hands-on work. Spreadsheets replaced face-to-face conversations. Success had become a number on a screen, not a feeling in the room. He finished his meal slowly, deliberately. As he stood to leave, he passed the young clerk again. She was helping an elderly man figure out the self-serve kiosk, her voice patient and kind, despite how exhausted she must have been. He almost said something. Thanked her, asked how her shift was going, but he stopped himself. If he spoke now, it might scare her. Or worse, she might think he was just being polite, the way customers sometimes are without meaning it. So he walked out quietly, the automatic doors hissing shut behind him. The night air was cool. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking back through the glass. Inside, the lights were bright, the colors bold, the logo cheerful. From the outside, it looked like everything was working perfectly. But he knew better now. Back in his car, he didn't start the engine right away. He pulled out a small notebook, the kind he used for quick ideas, and wrote 2 words: listen more. Then he drove home, but his mind was already racing ahead. He needed to understand what was really happening in his stores. Not through filtered reports, but through real eyes, real voices, real stories. That clerk's comment hadn't been an attack, it had been a gift. A wake-up call wrapped in honesty. The next morning, instead of heading straight to the office, he called his assistant and canceled his first 3 meetings. Then he made a list, 10 underperforming locations across the city, chosen not by sales data but by employee turnover rates. He'd visit them all one by one in the same disguise. He wouldn't interfere. He wouldn't reveal himself. He'd just watch, listen, and learn. But before he did any of that, he sent a quiet message to HR. Pull the file on the clerk from the 12th and Maple location. Not to reprimand her, never that, but to understand her story. How long had she worked there? Had she ever filed a complaint? Was she getting the hours she needed? He wanted to know who she was, not as an employee number, but as a person. By midday, the answer came back. She'd been with the company for 18 months. No disciplinary record. Consistently positive feedback from mystery shoppers. But her requested schedule? Changes. Mostly asking for earlier shifts so she could pick up. Her son from school had been denied 3 times due to staffing. Constraints. Her last performance review noted she was a reliable team player, but also seemed increasingly fatigued. He read the notes twice. Then he leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. 18 months. That was longer than most stayed in that role. She wasn't just showing up. She was trying to make it work even when the system made it hard. And still, she'd found the energy to be kind to a confused customer the night before. That wasn't just professionalism. That was character. He realized then that the problem wasn't laziness or incompetence on the front lines. It was a failure of leadership from the top down. He'd built a machine that ran on people but forgotten to oil the human parts. Over the next few days, he visited 2 more locations. One was spotless but eerily quiet, with only 1 employee handling both counter and kitchen. The other was chaotic, with orders getting mixed up and customers waiting 20 minutes for food. In both places, he heard similar themes. Not enough staff, outdated equipment, little communication from corporate. And always that quiet resignation in people's voices, like they'd stopped expecting things to get better. But it was the memory of that first clerk, the one who'd spoken so plainly about drowning, that stayed with him. Her words had cracked something open inside him. He hadn't just heard them, he'd felt them. By the end of the week, he knew what he had to do. He couldn't fix everything overnight, but he could start by listening, really listening to the people who kept his business alive. And maybe, just maybe, he could earn back the trust that had quietly slipped away. He didn't know it yet, but that night at the fast food restaurant would become the turning point, not just for the company, but for him. Because sometimes the most important truths aren't found in boardrooms or balance sheets. They're whispered by tired voices behind a counter, hoping someone, anyone, will finally hear them. The alarm buzzed at 4:45 a.m., a harsh mechanical sound that cut through the quiet like a warning. She didn't groan or hit snooze. She just opened her eyes, sat up, and swung her legs over the edge of the bed. Her back ached, a dull, familiar throb that never really went away, but she ignored it. There wasn't time to nurse soreness. There was only time to move. In the dim light of the bedroom, she checked on her son. He was still asleep, curled under his dinosaur blanket, one arm flung over his stuffed rabbit. She stood there for a few seconds just watching him breathe. It was the only quiet moment she'd get all day. Then she tiptoed out, closed the door softly, and got to work. 5:15, she was dressed in yesterday's uniform. Black pants, red polo, name tag pinned crooked again because the clasp had broken weeks ago. She made a quick breakfast, oatmeal for him, black coffee for her. She packed his lunch, peanut butter sandwich, apple slices, a granola bar, and left a note on the counter. Love you. Be good, Mom. She kissed his forehead before leaving, whispering, see you after school, even though he didn't stir. Then she walked out into the cool morning air, her breath visible in the streetlight glow, and caught the first bus to the restaurant. She'd been working the early shift for 3 weeks now, not because she wanted to, but because the afternoon slots kept getting given to newer hires who didn't have kids. She'd asked her manager again last week if she could switch back to days that ended by 3 p.m., so she could pick her son up from school. He'd nodded, said he'd look into it, but nothing changed. She didn't push. Pushing never helped. It only made you look difficult, and difficult people didn't get scheduled. The restaurant was already humming when she arrived. The overnight crew was wrapping up, the fryers bubbling, the grill sizzling. She clocked in, tied her hair back, and got straight to work. There was no time for small talk. Orders started piling up the moment the doors opened at 6 a.m. Truck drivers grabbing coffee and biscuits, office workers rushing in for egg sandwiches, parents with toddlers in tow. She worked the front counter, taking orders, handling payments, refilling drinks, cleaning spills. Her feet burned inside her non-slip shoes, but she kept moving. At 9 a.m., the breakfast rush slowed, and for 10 minutes she leaned against the counter, massaging her lower back. That's when the manager came over. You okay? He asked, voice low. Yeah, she said, straightening up quickly. Just tired. He nodded. He looked tired too. Dark circles under his eyes, stubble on his chin. He'd been covering shifts all week because 2 employees had quit without notice. Corporate's sending a new training module next week, he said. Mandatory. Gotta do it on your own time. She didn't react. She'd heard that before. Own time meant after her shift or on her day off, unpaid. But she just said, all right, and went back to wiping down the ketchup dispensers. She didn't hate her job. Not really. There were good days. When a regular customer remembered her name, when her team worked like a well-oiled machine, when she got home early enough to read her son a bedtime story. But those days were getting rarer. What wore her down wasn't the work itself. It was the feeling that no one saw her. Not really. She showed up, did what was asked, never complained, but it didn't matter. Equipment broke and stayed broken. Schedules changed last minute. Promised bonuses vanished into vague emails about budget reallocations. And every time she asked for a little flexibility, just enough to be both a good employee and a good mom, the answer was always the same. We'll see. She remembered her first week on the job. She'd been nervous but excited. The uniform felt crisp, the training videos full of smiling faces and promises of growth. We're a family here, the onboarding video had said. Back then, she'd believed it. Now, family felt like a word used to make people work harder for less. At lunchtime, she took her 20-minute break in the back room, eating a cold sandwich from her bag while scrolling through her phone. A text from her son's teacher popped up. He forgot his science project again. Can you bring it tomorrow? She sighed. She'd reminded him twice. But she typed back, yes, I'll bring it. Sorry about that. She thought about calling the school to explain, about how mornings were chaotic, how she was doing her best. But she didn't. No one wanted excuses. They just wanted results. Her break ended. She tossed the wrapper, washed her hands, and returned to the floor. The afternoon rush was lighter, but the work didn't stop. She restocked napkins, cleaned the dining area, helped the kitchen prep for dinner. Around 4 p.m., a customer snapped at her because his fries were too salty. She apologized, remade the order, and forced a smile. Inside, she wanted to cry. But crying wasn't allowed. Not here. It was during a lull later that evening, the one she'd been standing in when the man in the baseball cap had ordered his burger, that she'd said it. Not loudly. Not angrily. Just a quiet remark to a coworker who'd been there even longer than she had. I swear, if the boss ever walked in here, I'd tell him we're all drowning, and he wouldn't care. She hadn't seen the man. Hadn't known he was listening. If she had, she might have bitten her tongue. But the words had been building for months and they'd slipped out before she could stop them. Not as a complaint, really. More like a truth she needed to say out loud, just to feel like she hadn't gone completely silent. She didn't expect anything to come of it. People said things like that all the time, in break rooms, in parking lots, in hushed tones between orders. It was just air. Just noise. No one in charge ever heard it. But that night something felt different. Maybe it was the weight of the day, or the fact that her son had called her 3 times from after-school care because he missed her. Or maybe it was just exhaustion lowering her guard. Whatever it was, she went home feeling raw, like her skin was too thin. Her son was already in bed when she got there, but he'd left a drawing on the kitchen table. A stick figure woman with big hair labeled Mom, holding hands with a smaller figure labeled Me. Underneath, in wobbly letters, "You are the best." She stood there for a long time staring at it. Then she carefully taped it to the fridge right next to his school photo. The next morning she woke up to a surprise. Her manager had posted the new schedule early. And there it was, her name next to a 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. shift for the rest of the week. Not perfect, but better. She could pick her son up by 6:15 if she hurried. It wasn't what she'd asked for, but it was something. She didn't question it, didn't ask why. She just felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe things were starting to shift. What she didn't know was that someone had been paying attention. At the same time, miles away in a quiet office, the CEO sat with a folder open on his desk. Inside were her work records, her schedule requests, notes from her performance reviews. He'd read them all twice. He'd even watched the security footage from that night, not to catch her saying something wrong, but to see her in action. He saw how she helped the elderly man with the kiosk, how she stayed calm when the fryer alarm went off, how she smiled at a crying toddler and handed the mom a clean bib without being asked. He saw a person who showed up, day after day, and gave her best, even when the system gave her nothing in return. He thought about his own kids, about how he'd missed soccer games and school plays because of urgent meetings. He'd told himself it was for them, that building the company would give them a better life. But watching this woman on grainy video, juggling 100 tasks with quiet grace, he wondered if he'd gotten it backward. Maybe success wasn't just about building something big. Maybe it was about building something that didn't break the people who made it run. He picked up the phone and called his head of operations. "Cancel the new staffing cuts," he said, "and get me a list of every store that's been flagged for high turnover. I want to visit them myself." Then he opened a new document and started typing, "Proposal, Frontline Support Initiative." He didn't have all the answers yet, but he knew where to start, with listening, with respect, with fixing the things that had been broken for too long. Back at the restaurant, she was restocking straws when her manager approached. "Hey," he said, "corporate just sent a message. They're rolling out some changes. Better equipment repairs, more predictable schedules, and get this, they're bringing back the retention bonus." She blinked. "For real?" He shrugged, but he was smiling. Said it came straight from the top. Guess someone finally listened. She didn't know what to say. She just nodded, her throat tight. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel invisible. That night, as she walked home under the streetlights, her son's hand in hers, she felt lighter. Not because everything was fixed, far from it, but because someone somewhere had heard her. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start changing things. She didn't know the CEO had been the man in the baseball cap. She didn't know her words had sparked a quiet revolution in a boardroom. All she knew was that tomorrow she'd show up again. Not because she had to, but because she still believed, just a little, that her work mattered. And sometimes, that belief was the most powerful thing of all. The morning sun hadn't yet burned off the chill when the CEO walked into the corporate headquarters, but something in his step was different. He didn't head straight to his corner office with its floor-to-ceiling windows and leather chairs. Instead, he went to the conference room on the 3rd floor, the one usually reserved for quarterly reviews and investor calls. Inside, a long table gleamed under fluorescent lights, empty except for a stack of folders and a carafe of coffee. He poured himself a cup, black, no sugar, and sat down at the head of the table. He wasn't waiting for permission. He was waiting for people. One by one they filed in, his senior leadership team, the head of operations, the chief financial officer, the head of human resources, the regional directors. They exchanged quiet greetings, sipped coffee, checked their phones. No one seemed alarmed. To them, this was just another strategy meeting. Another day of fine-tuning the machine. But the CEO wasn't here to fine-tune. He was here to dismantle something. When everyone was seated, he didn't open with slides or charts. He didn't talk about margins or market share. He leaned forward, hands flat on the table, and said, "Last week I went to the store on 12th and Maple. I stood in line like any customer. And I heard something I can't unhear." A few eyebrows lifted. Someone shifted in their chair. I heard one of our employees say, "If the boss ever showed up, I'd tell him we're all drowning and he wouldn't care." He paused. She was right. I wouldn't have cared because I didn't know. Silence settled over the room like fog. Then the CFO cleared his throat. "Look, frontline morale is always going to be a challenge. We've got to balance efficiency with empathy. You can't run a national chain on feelings." "I'm not talking about feelings," the CEO said, voice steady. "I'm talking about facts. I visited 3 more locations after that. Same story everywhere. Broken equipment, staffing shortages, managers working 60-hour weeks just to keep the doors open, and not one of you mentioned any of this in your last reports." The head of operations frowned. "We flag issues through the proper channels. If a store needs repairs, they submit a ticket. If they're short-staffed, they request coverage. The system works, undoes it?" the CEO asked. "Because the woman at 12th and Maple has asked for a schedule change 3 times so she can pick up her son from school. Each time she was told staffing constraints. Meanwhile, we're pushing new upsell scripts and cutting training hours. We're asking people to do more with less and acting surprised when they burn out." He reached into his bag and pulled out a small notebook, flipped it open. "I've been keeping notes. At the downtown location, the ice cream machine's been broken for 6 weeks. At the mall store, they're down to 1 register during lunch rush because the second one's under maintenance, which really means we haven't budgeted to fix it. And at the highway exit store, the overnight crew sleeps in their cars between shifts because public transit doesn't run that late, and we don't offer ride reimbursement." He looked around the table. "This isn't operational efficiency. This is neglect." The room stayed quiet. No one argued. No one defended. They just sat there absorbing the weight of what he was saying. Finally, the HR director spoke. "So what do you want to do?" "I want us to see the people behind the payroll numbers," he said. "Not as labor costs, but as human beings who keep this company alive. I want us to stop measuring success only by what shows up on a balance sheet. Because if we lose their trust, no amount of profit will save us." He laid out a plan, not polished, not perfect, but real. Immediate equipment repairs for all flagged stores. A freeze on any further staffing cuts. A new policy that guaranteed schedule requests for caregivers would be honored when possible. And a pilot program where every executive would spend 1 full shift per quarter working in a store. No titles, no special treatment. The CFO looked uneasy. "That's going to cost money and slow down our expansion timeline." "Then we slow down," the CEO said. "Better to grow slowly with integrity than fast with broken people." Not everyone agreed. Some nodded slowly, thoughtfully. Others exchanged skeptical glances. But no one outright refused. Maybe because they saw the fire in his eyes. Or maybe because, deep down, they knew he was right. Over the next few days, the CEO didn't retreat to his office. He walked the halls, talked to mid-level managers, sat in on team calls. He asked questions, real ones, not performative ones. "What's the one thing that would make your job easier? What do you wish corporate understood? If you could change one policy, what would it be?" The answers surprised him. Not because they were radical, but because they were so simple. "Let us fix things without waiting 6 weeks for approval. Trust us to manage our teams. Stop changing the menu every month. It confuses customers and stresses staff." He started making changes right away. Small ones at first. He approved a backlog of repair tickets that had been stuck in review. He canceled a planned reduction in break room supplies. He reinstated a modest retention bonus that had been quietly eliminated last year. But the real test came when he called an emergency meeting with the regional directors, the people who oversaw dozens of stores each. These were tough, no-nonsense leaders who prided themselves on hitting targets. He expected pushback. What he got was something else entirely. One director, a woman who'd been with the company since the early days, spoke up. "I've been saying this for months," she admitted. "My managers are exhausted. They're quitting to work at grocery stores because at least they get consistent hours. but every time I brought it up, I was told to tighten the belt. She looked around. Maybe it's time we loosened it instead. Another director nodded. I've got a store in a low-income neighborhood. Half my crew are single parents. When we cut their hours to optimize labor, we didn't just hurt sales, we hurt lives. And I didn't say anything because I thought that's just how business works. The CEO listened, really listened, and for the first time in years, he felt like he was hearing the truth, not the version polished for executives, but the raw, messy reality on the ground. He made a decision then. He would visit 10 more stores himself. Not as a CEO, but as a learner. He'd work a full shift, taking orders, cleaning tables, restocking supplies. He'd eat the food, stand on the same tired floors, feel the same pressure, and he'd do it without warning anyone. His first stop was a store near a community college. It was understaffed as expected, but what struck him was the spirit of the team. They were stretched thin, yes, but they laughed together between orders. They covered for each other without being asked. When a customer lost his wallet, they pooled their tips to cover his meal until he could get back with cash. It wasn't efficiency. It was care. He worked the drive-through headset for 4 hours. His neck ached from craning to hear. His voice grew hoarse, repeating orders. By the end of the shift, his feet throbbed. And he hadn't even done the hardest parts, like cooking or cleaning the grease traps. When he finally took off the headset, the shift supervisor handed him a bottle of water. "You did okay for a newbie," she said with a tired smile. He thanked her, didn't reveal who he was, just said, "You all do this every day." "I don't know how you do it," she shrugged. "You just do, because someone's gotta." That night, back in his hotel room, he wrote in his notebook, "We've confused endurance with consent. Just because they keep showing up doesn't mean they're okay." The next store was different. Tense, quiet, everyone moving like ghosts. The manager barely looked up from his clipboard. When the CEO asked if everything was all right, the man just said, "We're short 2 people again." No anger, just resignation. It hit the CEO harder than he expected. This wasn't just about policy. It was about dignity. These people weren't asking for luxury. They were asking to be seen, to be trusted, to be treated like they mattered. By the end of the week, he'd worked 5 shifts in 5 different locations. He'd seen kindness and frustration, teamwork and isolation, pride and quiet despair. But one thing was clear everywhere. The people on the front lines loved what they did, when they were given the tools and respect to do it well. Back at headquarters, he called his team together again. This time, he didn't just talk. He showed them photos, grainy phone shots of broken equipment, overcrowded break rooms, handwritten notes from employees taped to lockers. He played a short audio clip, with permission, of a crew debriefing after a tough shift, laughing, venting, supporting each other. "This is our company," he said. Not the logo, not the stock price. This. He announced a new initiative, Operation Ground Truth. Every department head would spend a week embedded in a store, not observing, participating, cleaning floors, taking orders, handling complaints, and afterward, they'd present one actionable change they'd commit to based on what they learned. Some resisted. "I've got a product launch next month," one said. "I can't just disappear for a week." "Then reschedule it," the CEO replied. "Because if we don't fix this, there won't be a company to launch anything for." Slowly, grudgingly, the team came around. Maybe because they saw he was serious, or maybe because, like him, they'd forgotten what the heart of the business really was, and they were ready to remember. As the meeting ended, the HR director lingered. "You really think this will work?" she asked. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know we can't keep doing what we've been doing. That woman at 12th and Maple didn't say she was drowning because she wanted to complain. She said it because she still cared enough to hope someone would listen." He looked out the window at the city below. Somewhere out there, in 100 different stores, people were showing up, doing their best, holding things together with sheer will. And for the first time in a long time, he felt not like a CEO, but like a steward. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Change never was. But he finally understood. A company isn't built on profits. It's built on people, and if you take care of them, everything else follows. The morning air was crisp, the kind that carries the promise of change. She arrived at work earlier than usual, drawn by a quiet restlessness she couldn't name. The store looked the same. Same bright lights, same menu boards, same hum of the soda machine. But something felt different. Maybe it was the new sign near the register, "Equipment repairs completed this week." Or maybe it was the fact that her schedule hadn't changed last minute for once. Whatever it was, she tied her apron with a little more care than usual and got to work. She didn't notice him at first. He walked in just after 10 a.m. Not in a baseball cap this time, but in a crisp button-down shirt and dark slacks. No disguise. No attempt to blend in. He carried himself differently now. Not like someone hiding, but like someone returning. When he stepped up to the counter, she looked up, ready to take his order, and froze. Recognition hit her like a wave. It wasn't just that she'd seen him before. It was the way he looked at her. Not past her, not through her, but right at her with an expression that said, "I remember you." Her stomach dropped. All at once, the words she'd spoken that night came rushing back. If the boss ever showed up, I'd tell him we're all drowning and he wouldn't care. She'd said it quietly to a coworker, never expecting anyone important to hear. But he had. And now he was here. She braced herself. This was it. She'd be fired. Or worse, publicly called out in front of everyone. She glanced toward the manager's office, half expecting him to appear with a stern look and a termination slip. But instead, the man smiled. Not a corporate smile. Not the kind she saw in training videos. A real one, warm, a little tired, full of something that looked like gratitude. "Hi," he said. "I'd like to order the same thing as last time. Cheeseburger, medium fries, large soda." She blinked. "You remember what you ordered?" "I remember a lot of things," he said gently. Then, after a pause, "And I owe you a thank you." Her hand stilled on the register. Thank you?" "Yes." He leaned slightly on the counter, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "What you said that night, it mattered. More than you know." She didn't know what to say. Her throat tightened. She wanted to believe him, but years of being overlooked had taught her to be careful with hope. Before she could respond, the manager came out of the back, eyes wide. He'd recognized the man instantly. He hurried over, stammering a greeting, offering to take the order himself, but the man shook his head. "No, it's okay. I'd like her to take it." So she did. Hands trembling slightly, she rang up the order, handed him the receipt, and watched as he stepped aside to wait. But he didn't go to a booth. He stayed near the pickup counter, watching the kitchen, nodding at the staff, asking the fry cook how the new oil filtration system was working. Then, just as her shift was about to end, he walked back over. "I'm not here to inspect," he said. "I'm here to listen. And to help." He turned to the small group of employees who'd gathered, curious and cautious. "I've spent the last few weeks visiting stores, talking to teams, seeing what's really going on. And I've realized something. We've been building a company that looks great from the outside but feels broken from the inside. That ends today." He didn't speak like a CEO delivering a speech. He spoke like someone who'd been lost and finally found his way back. He listed the changes starting immediately. Broken equipment would be fixed within 48 hours, not weeks. Staffing levels would be adjusted based on actual need, not arbitrary cost targets. Schedule requests for parents, students, and caregivers would be prioritized. And the retention bonus? It was coming back, plus a small raise for all frontline workers. A murmur went through the room. Not disbelief exactly, more like cautious wonder. Then he did something no one expected. He rolled up his sleeves, walked behind the counter, and said, "Show me how to work the register." At first, no one moved. Then the shift lead, a woman who'd been there 10 years, stepped forward. "You'll need to log in under training mode," she said, voice steady but eyes wide. For the next 3 hours, he worked. He took orders, fumbled with the touchscreen, double-checked drink sizes, apologized when he got an order wrong. He wiped down tables, refilled napkin dispensers, even helped mop a spill near the restrooms. He didn't do it for show. He did it because he needed to understand, not just with his mind, but with his hands, and through it all, he kept talking. Not giving orders, asking questions. "What's the hardest part of this job? What would make your day easier? If you could change one thing about how we run this place, what would it be?" She watched him, still wary but slowly letting her guard down. She saw how he listened, really listened, when the dishwasher talked about missing the last bus home. How he nodded seriously when the teen cashier said customers were confused by the new combo names. How he didn't interrupt, didn't defend, didn't promise quick fixes. He just absorbed it all like he was collecting pieces of a puzzle he'd ignored for too long. During a lull, he came over to where she was restocking straws. "Can I ask you something?" he said. She nodded. "What do you wish leadership knew about people like you?" She hesitated. Then, because he'd earned it, she told the truth. That we're not just bodies filling shifts. We're parents, students, caregivers. We show up tired, stressed, sometimes heartbroken, and we still try to give customers a good experience. But it's hard when it feels like no one upstairs sees us as real people. He didn't offer empty praise. Didn't say, "You're amazing," like it was a script. He just said, "You're right," and that's on me. Later, as the lunch rush began, he stepped aside to let the real team take over. But before he left, he gathered everyone in the break room. Just 10 of them, standing in a loose circle around a dented microwave and a fridge covered in sticky notes. "I'm not going to fix everything overnight," he said, "but I'm going to keep showing up. And I'm going to make sure your voices are heard, not just by me, but by everyone who makes decisions." Then he looked at her. "And I'd like your help," she frowned. "My help?" "Yes, we're creating a new role, frontline ambassador. Someone who works in the stores, listens to the teams, and brings real feedback straight to headquarters. No filters, no corporate speak. Just truth. I can't think of anyone better for it." She was stunned. "But I'm just a clerk. You're the reason I'm here," he said simply. "You spoke up when it was easier to stay quiet. That's leadership." The offer wasn't a promotion in the usual sense. It wasn't about a fancier title or a corner office. It was about trust. About giving someone who lived the reality every day a seat at the table where decisions were made. She didn't say yes right away. She needed to think. But for the first time in a long time, she felt seen. Not as a problem to manage, but as a person with wisdom worth listening to. Word spread fast. By the next day, employees at other stores were texting her, calling her, asking, "Is it true? Is he really changing things?" She didn't have all the answers, but she told them what she'd seen. A man who'd come back not to punish, but to repair. Over the next week, he visited 3 more locations. Each time he worked a shift. Each time he announced changes based on what he heard. At one store, he approved a request for a second microwave so the night crew could heat their meals. At another, he fast-tracked a safety upgrade after a crew member slipped on a wet floor. He didn't wait for reports. He acted. Back at headquarters, the shift was palpable. Executives who'd once talked about labor optimization now asked, "How will this affect the team on the ground?" Budget meetings included line items for employee dignity, not as a slogan, but as a real cost center. And the Operation Ground Truth program launched, with department heads nervously donning aprons and learning how to make milkshakes. None of it was perfect. Old habits didn't vanish overnight. There were still missteps, delays, moments of frustration, but the tone had changed. People felt safer speaking up. Managers felt empowered to fix small problems without waiting for approval, and customers noticed. The food came faster, the staff smiled more, the place just felt better. One evening, as she locked up after her shift, she found a note taped to her locker. It was from him. Just 2 lines. "Thank you for reminding me why we started this. The real work begins now, and I'm glad you're part of it." She folded the note and put it in her pocket, not because she needed proof, but because it felt like a promise. The next morning, she walked into the store with her head a little higher. She wasn't just clocking in. She was stepping into something bigger, a company that was finally trying to live up to the values it claimed to have. And for the first time in a long time, she believed it might actually happen. 6 months had passed since the man in the baseball cap walked into the store on 12th and Maple and heard those 5 words that changed everything. "We're all drowning, and he wouldn't care." Now, that same location hummed with a different kind of energy. The lights were brighter, not just because the bulbs had been replaced, but because the people inside carried themselves with a quiet pride. The ice cream machine worked. The schedule board was posted a week in advance, and the break room had a new coffee maker, donated by corporate but chosen by the staff. She stood near the training station, clipboard in hand, watching a new hire fumble with the register. She didn't step in right away. She let the young woman make the mistake, then gently showed her how to correct it. "It's okay," she said. "I messed up my first 10 orders too." This was her new role, frontline ambassador, but she still wore the same red polo, still punched the same time clock. The difference was now she spent part of her week visiting other stores, listening to crews bringing their concerns back to a monthly meeting with leadership. She didn't speak corporate jargon. She spoke in stories. The night shift at Oak Street says they can't hear the drive-through headset over the hood fan. The team in Riverbend needs more gloves. They're reusing them to save money. And every time someone acted, she never thought she'd be the one shaping policy. But here she was, not as a figurehead, but as a bridge between the people who kept the ovens running and the people who signed the checks. Meanwhile, the CEO had changed too. He still ran the company, but he no longer measured success only in quarterly reports. He tracked something else now: employee retention rates, schedule stability scores, even something called dignity metrics. Simple surveys asking, "Do you feel respected here?" The answers weren't always perfect, but they were honest. And that was progress. He'd kept his promise. Every quarter, he worked a full shift somewhere in the chain, sometimes in a busy downtown location, sometimes in a quiet strip mall. He never announced it ahead of time. He just showed up, tied on an apron, and got to work. And each time he came back with notes, real handwritten notes that ended up in strategy meetings. One afternoon, he visited a store on the other side of town. It was raining, the kind of steady drizzle that made the parking lot slick and the windows foggy. He ordered a burger, took a seat in the corner, and watched. The place was clean. The staff moved with calm efficiency. A young employee helped an elderly customer carry her tray to a dry table. Another restocked napkins without being asked. When the CEO went to leave, he stopped at the counter to thank the manager. "You've got a good team here," he said. The manager smiled. "They've always been good. We just finally got the support to let them shine." That was the heart of it, he realized. People hadn't changed. The system had back at headquarters. The culture shift was visible in small ways. New hires were onboarded not just with policy manuals, but with stories from longtime employees. Leadership meetings started with a voice from the floor, a real quote from a crew member, read aloud before any financials were discussed. And the bonus structure? It now included team well-being goals alongside sales targets. If a store hit its numbers but had high turnover or low morale, the bonus didn't pay out. The message was clear. People mattered as much as profit. Not everyone liked the changes. A few franchise owners grumbled about costs. Some investors questioned the slower growth. But customer satisfaction scores had risen for 5 straight months. Employee turnover had dropped by nearly 40%, and in online reviews a new phrase kept appearing: "The staff here actually seem happy." That meant more than any graph. One day, the CEO received a letter from a customer, a teacher who'd been coming to the 12th and Maple location for years. She wrote, "I used to dread my lunch break because the place felt chaotic and stressed. Now it feels like a little oasis. The same people are there, but they're smiling. They remember my order. They ask how my students are doing. It's not just a meal, it's a moment of kindness." He pinned that letter to his office wall, right next to a photo of the original store, the one he'd opened with his own hands 20 years ago. He thought about that often. How easy it was to lose sight of why you started something in the first place, how success could become a cage if you let it, but it was never too late to come back. Now, on a quiet Tuesday evening, he found himself standing outside yet another store, this one in a neighborhood he'd never visited before. He wasn't here for a meeting or a photo op. He was just hungry, and maybe, just maybe, he wanted to see how far things had come. He walked in, ordered a burger and fries, and waited near the pickup counter. The place was calm. Music played softly. A couple of teenagers laughed while folding napkins into little hats. Behind the register, a young employee, maybe 19, with tired eyes but a steady hand, handed a customer their drink with a genuine, "Have a great night." As the CEO took his food, he overheard a snippet of conversation between 2 crew members. "I heard the boss ate at the West Side store last week," one said, wiping down the counter. "Really?" the other replied, refilling ketchup bottles. "Did he like the fries?" "He did," the first one said, smiling. "Said they were the best he'd had in years." The CEO paused, burger in hand. He didn't correct them. He didn't need to. The fact that they even believed he might show up, and that they cared whether he liked the food, said everything. He found a booth by the window, unwrapped his meal, and took a bite. The burger was hot. The fries were crisp. But more than that, it tasted like hope. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. Cars passed. A bus pulled up at the corner. Life went on. But inside this little restaurant, something quiet and powerful had taken root. Respect. He thought about the woman who'd spoken up that night. She wasn't a hero in the traditional sense. She hadn't staged a protest or written a manifesto. She'd just said what was true, and in doing so, she'd reminded an entire company of its soul. Now, she was helping train the next generation of leaders, not in boardrooms, but on the floor, showing them that good service starts with good care, not just for customers but for each other. As he finished his meal, a young employee approached to clear his tray. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Better than okay," he said. "Thank you," she smiled and walked away, already turning to help another customer. He sat there for a moment longer, watching the rhythm of the place, the teamwork, the patience, the small acts of kindness that no report could ever capture. Then he stood, tossed his trash, and stepped out into the cool evening air. The sky was clear. Stars were starting to show. He took a deep breath, feeling lighter than he had in years. He didn't have all the answers. The work wasn't done. There would still be tough days, hard decisions, moments of doubt. But for the first time in a long time, he knew he wasn't leading alone. He was walking alongside the people who made everything possible. And that was enough. Back at the store, the crew began their closing routine, wiping counters, sweeping floors, counting the register. As they worked, one of them turned to another and said, "You know, I actually like coming here now." The other nodded. "Yeah, feels like we matter. No grand speeches. No fanfare. Just two people doing their jobs, feeling seen, feeling valued." And in that ordinary moment, the real success of the company was clear, not in stock prices or square footage, but in the quiet dignity of everyday work done well, by people who finally believed someone was listening. The CEO walked to his car, burger bag crumpled in his hand. He didn't look back, but he didn't need to. He carried the feeling with him, the hum of a place that had remembered its heart. And somewhere, in 100 different towns, the same story was unfolding, not of a perfect company, but of a healing one. One meal, one conversation, one act of courage at a time.